20,000 sailors are trapped in the Persian Gulf right now, not stranded by a storm, not delayed by mechanical failure, trapped by a regime that has decided it can hold the global economy hostage while its own country burns to the ground. And while America launched a military-escorted humanitarian corridor to free those ships and those crews, Iran responded by firing ballistic missiles at one of the most peaceful, neutral nations in the entire Middle East. Let that sink in. The United Arab Emirates did everything right. It stayed out of the war. It denied America use of its airspace. It bent over backwards to avoid being a target. And Iran hit it anyway. 15 ballistic missiles, drones striking a refinery, 4 missile alerts scrambling civilians in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, commercial aircraft turning around mid-flight over the Gulf. This is not a skirmish. This is not posturing. This is a regime in its final death throes, lashing out at anything within reach, and every move it makes is dragging the United States closer to a decision that will end the Iranian government as we know it. The Strait of Hormuz is the most dangerous place on the planet right now, and if you are not paying attention, you are going to wake up one morning to a war that swallowed the global economy while you were looking away. If this is the first time you're hearing my voice, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. What is unfolding in the Persian Gulf is moving faster than any news cycle can keep up with. And you need someone who is going to tell you the truth about what is actually happening, not the sanitized version, not the diplomatic softening, the truth. Subscribe, let's get into it. It started on the morning of May 4th, 2026, with something that sounds almost mundane when you strip away the military jargon. A bulk carrier, a large commercial ship hauling cargo through one of the world's most critical waterways, was swarmed by Iranian fast attack boats off the coast of Bandar Abbas, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre, which functions as the global clearinghouse for maritime distress signals and gets real-time reports directly from crews operating in dangerous waters, flagged the incident immediately. The initial report was unambiguous, an Iranian naval interdiction attempt on a civilian vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. That's not a routine patrol. That's not a friendly check-in. That is an act of aggression against international commercial shipping. Then Iranian state media did what Iranian state media always does. It lied. The ship wasn't seized, they said. They were just checking documents. Routine inspection. Nothing to see here. But here is the thing about routine inspections. They don't trigger international maritime alerts. They don't involve multiple armed speedboats converging on a civilian vessel. And they don't happen in the context of a regime that has already been mining the same strait it claims to be policing. That evening, President Trump dropped a statement that the Iranian leadership was absolutely not prepared for. He called it Project Freedom, a United States military operation, beginning the very next morning, in which American naval assets would escort stranded commercial vessels out of the Persian Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump's words were precise, deliberate, and worth understanding in full. He described the ships as carrying innocent crews from countries all over the world that had nothing to do with the Middle Eastern conflict. He called the operation a humanitarian gesture on behalf of the United States and the international community. And then he added the line that should have made every general in Tehran go pale. If this humanitarian process is interfered with, that interference would unfortunately have to be dealt with forcefully. Forcefully. From a man who had already ordered the destruction of 158 Iranian naval vessels, leveled Iran's air force and eliminated every submarine in the IRGC fleet. When Donald Trump says forcefully, you do not want to find out what he means. The scale of what Project Freedom was attempting to accomplish is difficult to overstate. We are not talking about a dozen ships waiting for a weather window to clear. According to multiple reports, approximately 2,000 commercial vessels are physically trapped inside the Persian Gulf. 2,000 ships, carrying crude oil, fertilizer, liquefied petroleum gas that more than 1 billion people in India and South Asia depend on for cooking. These ships crossed the strait before the war erupted in late February, and ever since the IRGC began attacking civilian vessels attempting to exit, those ships have been sitting there, anchored, drifting, waiting for more than 60 consecutive days. Their crews are running out of food, running out of fresh water, running out of basic medical supplies. These are not abstract casualties of war. These are real human beings stuck in the middle of a geopolitical standoff they have absolutely nothing to do with. U.S. Central Command filled in the operational details that Trump's statement left vague. Project Freedom would not necessarily involve U.S. Navy ships sailing in convoy formation directly alongside every commercial vessel. Instead, American naval assets would be positioned throughout the region, ready to intercept any Iranian attempt to interfere. The US Navy would also share critical navigational intelligence with commercial operators, specifically information about which sea lanes remain safe and which areas still contain mines that the IRGC laid during the opening weeks of the war. That detail is not a footnote. It is the entire strategic architecture of the operation. Because when ceasefire negotiations were stalling in Pakistan, 2 US destroyers made a deliberate transit through the strait, spent hours inside the Persian Gulf, and came back out. That was not a casual patrol. It was proof of concept, proof that navigable, mine-free corridors exist in the strait, that American forces know exactly where they are, and that Iran cannot stop what it cannot catch. On the morning of May 4th, the first ships moved. 2 US-flagged merchant vessels successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz, supported by guided missile destroyers, AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, and surveillance aircraft overhead. Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of US Central Command, confirmed the operation was proceeding. Burke-class destroyers were operating simultaneously in both the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Gulf. Liaison officers had been placed aboard commercial vessels to provide secure communications. The strait Iran had declared closed, sealed with missiles, mines, and its so-called Mosquito Navy, had just been crossed. Now here is where the story gets dark, because Iran's response to Project Freedom was not silence, and it was not negotiation. It was fabrication followed by violence. Iranian state media outlet Fars News published a claim that 2 missiles had struck a US frigate following its disregard for Iranian navigation warnings. They said the ship had violated security protocols and come under missile attack after ignoring warnings from the Islamic Republic's Navy. There is one enormous, fundamental problem with that story. The United States Navy does not operate any frigates. The last operational US Navy frigate was decommissioned in 2015. There are no frigates in the Persian Gulf. There are no frigates in the Arabian Sea. There are Burke-class guided missile destroyers, aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, and nuclear-powered submarines, but there are 0 frigates. Whatever Iran claims to have struck, it did not exist. US Central Command responded within hours. No US Navy ships have been struck. Every claim of Iranian success was false. This is not a one-time embarrassment. This is a pattern, and it is a pattern that should terrify anyone paying close attention, because it tells you something deeply important about the mental state of the people running Iran right now. According to documented reporting on IRGC media behavior throughout this conflict, Iranian state media has at various points during this war claimed to have shot down 30 different B-2 stealth bombers. 30. The United States does not even possess a B-2 fleet that large. Iranian social media accounts have circulated AI-generated images as supposed evidence of these victories. The gap between what Iran claims is happening and what is verifiably happening on the ground is not a rounding error. It is the difference between a government making strategic calculations and a government hallucinating its own competence. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put it as plainly as anyone in government has dared to. The Iranians are starting to believe their own propaganda. The regime's leadership is hunkered down in bunkers across the country. They may genuinely not know what is happening to their forces in real time. Think about what that means. A nuclear-armed regional power is making life-and-death military decisions based on state media reports that bear no relationship to reality. That is not strength. That is not defiance. That is an institution that has already collapsed internally and hasn't fully processed the news yet. So while the IRGC was inventing phantom frigates for its domestic audience, what was it actually doing in the real world? It was attacking the United Arab Emirates, a country that had by every measure done everything humanly possible to stay out of this war. The UAE had explicitly declared itself neutral. It had denied the United States the use of its airspace and bases for strikes on Iran. It had avoided provocation, avoided rhetoric, avoided any action that could be construed as hostile. And Iran fired 15 ballistic missiles at it anyway, along with 3 cruise missiles and 4 drones, all in a single day. UAE air defense systems intercepted 15 of the missiles and 3 of the drones, but 1 Iranian drone got through. It struck an oil refinery in Fujairah, a city on the Gulf of Oman side of the UAE that carries enormous strategic significance. 3 Indian nationals working at the facility were wounded. A major fire erupted at the Fujairah oil industry zone. Authorities issued 4 separate missile alert warnings, telling UAE residents to shelter in place. It was the first time those alerts had been activated since the ceasefire was announced nearly a month earlier. Commercial aircraft bound for Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest aviation hubs in the world, turned around mid-flight. Schools across the country switched to remote learning, with the Ministry of Education announcing that all schools and nurseries would operate online through Friday, pending reassessment. Now here is the part that reveals exactly how calculated this attack was. Fujairah is not just any city on the UAE coast. It is the terminus of a critical overland pipeline that the UAE specifically constructed to export oil without routing it through the Strait of Hormuz. That pipeline handles approximately 1.7 million barrels per day, roughly half of the UAE's total export capacity. It is the one facility that allows Middle Eastern oil to bypass the strait entirely. Hitting Fujairah was not random, it was not a mistake. It was a deliberate surgical strike against the UAE's last functioning oil export lifeline and against the very concept of a world that can move energy without Iran's permission. The UAE Foreign Ministry published a formal statement calling the strikes a dangerous escalation and an unacceptable violation, describing Iran's aggression as renewed and treacherous. Iran's armed forces spokesman appeared on state television and denied that Iranian forces had carried out any missile or drone operations against the UAE in recent days. The UAE's radar systems, its air defense logs, and the burning refinery in Fujairah said otherwise. Before we go further, take 1 second right now, pause this, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to lay out for you in the next few minutes is the full strategic picture of where Iran actually stands, and it is worse than anything their state media will ever admit. This is the kind of analysis you are not going to get from cable news, and I am not going to stop covering it. Subscribe, stay with me. Iran attacked the UAE, not from a position of strength. It attacked from desperation, and the economic data makes that desperation look almost grotesque in hindsight. Scott Bessant, speaking on Fox News the morning of May 4th, just hours before Project Freedom launched, laid out the full scope of what America has been doing to Iran's economy, with remarkable clarity. He said the United States has been running a marathon over the past 12 months and is now sprinting toward the finish line, suffocating the regime to the point where Iran cannot pay its soldiers. Read that again. The Iranian military cannot pay its soldiers. That is not rhetoric. That is an operational crisis. Soldiers who are not being paid do not fight as hard. Soldiers who are not being paid start wondering whether the regime they're dying for is worth it. Bessant confirmed that the naval blockade, which has been in full force since April 13th, has ensured that no ships are transiting the strait on the Iranian side. He dismissed the fees Iran had been attempting to collect from vessels using IRGC-designated lanes as a pittance compared to the oil revenue being lost every single day. He confirmed that Gulf states allied with the United States had actively assisted in tracking down Iranian financial assets held offshore, accounts, funds, and reserves that Treasury has vowed to preserve for the Iranian people on the other side of this conflict, not for the regime. The numbers behind all of this are staggering. Iran's economy is projected to shrink by 6.1% in 2026, with inflation running at 68.9%. The Iranian rial has collapsed to 1.32 million per US dollar. Iran's crude oil storage surged by more than 6 million barrels in just 8 days after the blockade tightened in mid-April, because Iran cannot export what it is producing. Bessant himself warned that Karg Island, where 90% of Iran's crude oil is exported, was approaching storage capacity, and that forcing the shutdown of oil wells could cost the regime an additional $170 million per day on top of the $500 million per day. Trump has publicly stated the blockade is already costing Tehran $500 million a day, every day. And the regime's response to that economic annihilation was to fire ballistic missiles at a neutral neighbor and attack ships protected by the most powerful navy in human history. Think about that strategic calculus for a moment, because what it tells you is that the people making decisions in Tehran have run out of rational options and are now operating entirely on ideology, fear, and the desperate hope that something, anything, will change the momentum before the entire system collapses. Iran's conventional navy is gone. According to Trump's own public statements, 158 Iranian naval vessels have been destroyed, lying at the bottom of the sea. 28 mine-dropping vessels have been sunk. Every Iranian submarine has been eliminated. The Air Force was largely degraded in the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury. The proxy network that Iran spent decades and billions of dollars building, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi forces in Yemen, is itself under severe military pressure from Israeli and American operations. What remains is exactly what Besant described, a band of pirates with fast attack boats, and America is swatting those boats out of the water in real time. During Project Freedom itself, Iranian forces launched multiple cruise missiles, drones, and small boat attacks against vessels under U.S. protection. Admiral Cooper described the American response as the clinical application of defensive munitions. Clinical. 6 to 7 Iranian fast attack boats were destroyed, attempting to interfere with the operation. The Mosquito Navy, as Besant called it, is being systematically eliminated engagement by engagement. And here is where we arrive at the only question that actually matters right now. What happens next? Because the United States is not standing still while Iran flails. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper met with President Trump and presented a formal menu of military options that the United States could deploy to increase pressure on Iran and compel a return to serious negotiations. Those options have been briefed, analyzed, and war-gamed. They include potential strikes on what remains of Iranian missile infrastructure, drone production facilities, port infrastructure at Bandar Abbas and Bushehr, and the oil platforms that represent whatever is left of Iran's hard currency generation. And then there is the most extreme option, the one that has never fully left the table and that Iranian strategists have nightmares about, a special forces and amphibious assault operation against Karg Island itself, the island that handles 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. The one facility whose seizure would permanently and irreversibly sever the Iranian regime from its only meaningful economic engine. Iran's economy is losing an estimated $500 million per day. Its oil storage is at risk of overflowing. Its wells may be forced to shut down within days, causing potentially decade-long damage to underground reservoirs that once offline cannot simply be turned back on. Its soldiers are not being paid. Its navy is gone, its air force is gone, its proxies are degraded. Its domestic population is facing acute material hardship that has pushed basic goods, sugar, eggs, cooking oil, to prices that have doubled or more in a matter of weeks. The internet blackout, the regime imposed to suppress internal dissent, has paralyzed e-commerce and digital banking. Farmers are not being paid, businesses are shuttered. The streets of Tehran are showing visible strain that the regime cannot paper over with propaganda. Senior Iranian economic officials have reportedly warned President Pezeshkian that it may take more than a decade to rebuild the country's war-damaged economy. The central bank governor has reportedly urged the president to pursue a peace deal urgently, and yet the hardliners remain in control. Pakistan has positioned itself as the primary mediator, and Islamabad hosted the only direct round of face-to-face talks between American and Iranian delegations since the war began. But J.D. Vance announced in April that those talks had failed, which is precisely what triggered the naval blockade. Iran insists it will not negotiate while the blockade is in force. Washington refuses to lift the blockade without meaningful nuclear concessions. It is a circular deadlock, and Iran is losing ground every single day that deadlock holds. Trump himself acknowledged the dynamic publicly, pausing Project Freedom for a short period at Pakistan's request while maintaining the blockade in full force. He said discussions could lead to something very positive for all. Iranian state media immediately declared it a victory. Trump backs down, they said. But the blockade didn't pause. The economic pressure didn't pause, the military options didn't leave the table, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio was absolutely clear: Iran's control over the strait will not be normalized. The toll collection scheme the IRGC has been running will not be accepted. The nuclear program remains the non-negotiable center of any framework for resolution. The question that will define the next few weeks is whether Iran's moderate voices, the economists, the central bankers, the officials quietly urging Pezeshkian to make a deal, can break through the hardliners who are hiding in bunkers, making decisions based on state media reports that bear no relationship to reality. Because if they cannot, the next chapter of this story does not involve negotiations. It involves the United States military executing options that have already been briefed to the President of the United States, and a regime that gambled everything on outlasting American resolve, discovering what it means to be wrong about that bet. Every missile Iran fires, every boat it sends out to be sunk, every attack it launches against neutral countries, brings Washington one step closer to a decision the Iranian government will not survive. The strait Iran thought it owned has been physically contested and partially opened by the most powerful naval force in human history. The economic lever Iran thought gave it permanent power over global energy markets is being systematically dismantled. The military Iran thought could deter American action is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, and the propaganda that sustains the regime's domestic legitimacy is colliding daily with a reality that no amount of state television coverage can obscure from the Iranian people living inside it. This is not about winning or losing anymore. America has already won the military confrontation. The only question left is whether Iran's leadership can accept that reality before the next escalation removes the option of acceptance entirely. That is where we are. That is what is at stake, and that is why you need to be here for every update as this unfolds, because this story is not slowing down, it is accelerating. If you have been watching this entire breakdown and you are still not subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I want to know what you think. Do you believe Iran's regime still has enough internal coherence to find its way back to the negotiating table before the next escalation? Or are we watching the final days of a government that chose terrorism, propaganda, and ballistic missiles over the one thing that might have actually saved it, a deal? Tell me what you think. The comment section is open, and I read every single one. Stay locked in. This is not over.